21st of December 2021. Hope everybody's doing good today. On this Tuesday. So we got a lot of stories to run through. Plan N is for nuclear. So what we're going to cover is news stories from the last 24 hours, basically. News stories from the last 24 hours. Forgot to turn the music off. My apologies. I don't know if that's music or not. And Plan A is to replace the home furnaces and internal combustion engines of our growing population with heat pumps and electric vehicles. Heat pumps and electric vehicles. And the biggest polluter on the planet, the world's 15 biggest ships create more pollution than 760 million cars that are on the planet. There is 90,000 of those ships on the ocean. That's into the trillions of people equivalent of pollution. Nuclear energy scares people. The climate crisis is giving it another chance. And of course, we heard this narrative, just this incredible screech that nuclear is the savior for what nuclear has done. And mothers for nuclear, these people work for the nuclear power industry at the power plant, usually at menial jobs on top of that. And so they formed this group where whenever they open their mouth, some media is going to run with it. Mothers for nuclear is despicable because nuclear destroys children of all species, not just humans. And people don't seem to realize there is a big picture. So EU likely to put gas nuclear. Now this is what you call posturing, where when they first were supposed to vote on this, when they were first supposed to vote, a lot of big medias were coming out and saying, woohoo, nuclear is declared green by the EU, which simply wasn't true. And the EU refused to pick a side. And so then there came the second time that had a deadline many months later, and they again refused to pick a side. And now we're seeing the third time around. And so all the nuclear industry got to do, and it's had the time now, is to replace the people in the EU because they're appointed, not elected, put in controlled assets, and then have them do the yes votes. See? And they will at some point. That's going to happen for sure. That's how they took over all of our universities, all your medias, all of them. You know, like the Pentagon, for instance, not counting China or the equivalent in India or Russia or wherever, just the Pentagon in the United States has 29,000 that I know about, public relation employees. So if you flip them to get a certain message out there, it's a very powerful weapon because they call up all the media and say, hi, we're with the Pentagon. We want to talk to the boss. And who's going to question them, right? They're going to know, well, he's too busy talking to shitheads like you. They're going to be, no, hang on, we'll get him. Hey, boss, the Pentagon is on the phone. They want you to lick their... They'll give you kickbacks for advertisement. EU likely to put gas nuclear in a green list. I'm terrified because Canada done that recently, and we got to go after the people that are responsible for that. So is your tin cans, your pop bottles, and your cardboard a bigger threat than 15 ships? Consider there's actually 90,000 of them out there. And nuclear is dirty. There is no such thing as clean nuclear. There's simply one type of nuclear. It's called dirty nuclear. It's disgusting. It's the most carbon-intensive thing to build it, to get the uranium mine, to running it, to decommissioning it. Takes 60 to 300 years. Dounreay in the United Kingdom says it'll be 300 years. You can go there and pick berries. And anybody goes there in 300 years and picks berries is going to get sick, by the way. In case of extreme cold, France is able to reduce the voltage delivered in a way that's very perceivable. So they're talking about these smart meters, I would imagine. I missed the headline on that story or something. Because, France wants to get more reactors running because 1/3 are down. They haven't got the maintenance done on them. And the fact that they can reduce the voltage to your home is a little bit scary. The situation deteriorated Wednesday when EDF, which is the government, by the way, nuclear arm of the disgusting French government, said it needed to halt 2 atomic reactors and prolong stoppages for 2 others for repairs and safety checks. With more than a quarter of the 56 atomic reactors are currently halted, as an unusual number for this time of the year because of the pandemic. The Fukushima pandemic has disrupted the utilities maintenance program. Why closing Diablo Canyon nuclear plant is a mistake? California can again. This is lobbying. You're seeing there. Diablo Canyon. They got enough fuel there to kill everybody in America many times over. They're right on the coastline. The buildings are very old and they suffer from neutron bombardment. In other words, it's kind of like a sheet of ice growing on your doorstep, and you go out and you hit it and it shatters. The metal now, because of the nuclear incredible bombardment, is fragile and is capable of shattering. So it's also on a fault line. And so if it's running and you have an earthquake and the earthquake shakes it and it gets a crack into it, you say, oh, well, then they can fix it, right? Well, actually, it's running at 1,000 psi. And so these fragile, brittle containment structures, if the problem is if you have an earthquake shake it, it gets a crack into it, you can imagine what 1,000 psi is going to do. Let's try that again. Revival of the Iran nuclear deal appears far off. Now, if anybody's following this conversation, or this story, I should say, every day there's 10, 20, 30 headlines. All of them are like, Iran's got 2 weeks left. Kind of like, we'll bomb you and kill you if you don't do what we tell you. The whole story about that, they got 49 bases around Iran. Russia sends nuclear-capable bombers on patrol over Belarus. Japan? I can't remember. The nuclear weapons ban treaty is wishful daydream or a historical milestone. Well, they're turning it into mixed oxide. They're turning it into mixed oxide. Hang on. They're taking missiles and then reprocessing it. Okay, so just think of a normal chain reaction for a second. The poison coming out of a normal, aka isotopes radiation, that's coming out of a typical everyday normal reactor are 1 billion times more toxic than industrial poison is. Now, the weird thing about nuclear is if you take the stuff that already went through a chain reaction and put it through a chain reaction again, it's 1 billion times more toxic, even at the atomic scale. And at that, when you do that to it, it has the energy to pulse. The radioactive fallout will pulse 20, 30, 40 feet away from its source. So you can put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle and you can't see it, but one of those atoms floating around in your home, pulsing energy throughout that room constantly, will radiate other material in your home. So when you've got huge numbers like I do, pulsing energy every second, that's a really concern. Nuclear power, Netherlands, which is perfect for wind power, by the way, are planning 2 new nuclear power plants. In a time and a moment, because this is a really interesting, because they got, look at all the windmills they got there for starters. The windmills, nuclear power is at sea level typically. A lot of it, right? If they got the option, it's going to be at sea level anyway. And on a fault line for some bizarre reason. And surrounded by farms. So they got lots of mountains in the Netherlands. That would be the best spot to put your windmills, obviously. You know, is this rocket science or something? Gee, Dana never thought about it, putting windmills on the mountain where the wind blows all the time. Sounds stupid. And so in the last 2 years, we on this planet have produced 633 nuclear power plants worth of renewable energies in just 24 months. So how long would it take you to build 633 nuclear power plants? Then you're going to need 633 times $1 billion for each plant for security per year. And the list keeps going. Whereas with renewables, you literally can walk away. You're not worried terrorists are going to blow up a pole and the terrorist being whichever military goes into a country. That's what a real terrorist is. How many suicide bombers does it take to equal an aircraft carrier, I wonder? So revival of the Iran nuclear deal showed up everywhere, that story. Nevada has spoken. We don't want a nuclear waste dump. Not in my backyard. This will go on for 1,000 years, right? Nobody's going to take it in their backyard. And the government is happy. The nuclear industry, rather, is very happy about that. They don't want it buried. They want it hemorrhaging, splitting the atom, all that waste, all day long splitting the atom, releasing it into the air, and you end up with radiation fallout. Because all the nuclear waste is splitting the atom. So the longer you do this, the more and more radioactive fallout. Till we're looking almost like this worldwide as we speak. You can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it. But you better wake up. You better get it together. You better start standing tall. Defense scrambles to train a nuclear scientist for a shitty job with submarines. Defense in Australia apparently is scrambling to train nuclear scientists in Australia. Of course, Australia's nuclear is banned, and Australia is the highest cancer rate per 100,000 on the planet. And Australia was brutalized with radioactive fallout by the British. In fact, the earliest known dirty bombs were used by the British military, where they wrapped up plutonium hundreds of times and fission uranium products, dirty bombs with conventional explosives, and set them off all over Australia, and then had their so-called scientists go out and sniff out where it ended up to. This is pure madness, by the way, still contaminated today. They set off nuclear weapons, the British did. They waited for the wind to blow across Australia. And the United Kingdom, decades later, paid $94 million for poisoning the entire continent, and then had the arrogance to say, don't ask us for anything else, the deal's sealed. But hey, if you want to work for an idiot machine, there's a good job for you right there in the nuclear industry. If you think you're a perfect idiot, then you get yourself on down there and they'll be happy to have you. Vietnam is poised to resume nuclear projects a decade from Fukushima. After Fukushima. Vietnam is poised to resume nuclear project a decade after Fukushima. Vietnam, they sprayed millions and probably billions of gallons of a banned substance, a banned chemical, a weapon, a chemical weapon known as Agent Orange, made by your friendly food producer Monsanto. Over the course of a decade, what they done was they sprayed Agent Orange and they defoliaged the entire country. And there's 3 million children currently that are disfigured. They put them out with a bowl to beg. So imagine these big bombers converted into chemtrail machines. And for 9 years, they sprayed Agent Orange till there was no insects and no plants and no leaves left in the entire country. And this is what you see the results of it even today. And they had a little atolls out there outside of Vietnam. They had stuffed with Agent Orange. The ships, when they came back with Agent Orange after the war, were scuttled off the Canadian coastline here in scallop grounds that have been feeding the populations of the planet for decades since. What an evil, insidious thing to do, though. Right? That's called collective punishment. That punishes everybody in every species. And there was incredible war crimes carried out. The secret history of Vietnam. The secret history of the Vietnam War. Well, it is a secret because people don't realize today, currently there's over 3 million children with incredible disabilities caused by this hateful, despicable, coward, ludicrous military-industrial complex and the people that participate in it. U.S. cites progress but warns a nuclear deal could die without urgent Iranian action. There is no deal. You made a fake deal while the country was surrounded with 49 military bases. So if someone wants to work a deal with you and they show up, with 50 people, counting them. And 50 people surround you, and they cut off you can't drive your car, you can't leave the house, you surround your house. And you stay there for 10 years. You can't leave your house, can't go to the shop, can't do banking, can't go anywhere. You got to sit in your house, play video games or something. And then a guy knocks on your door, and he says, we want to make a deal with you. And you say, are you going to get rid of the 50 people around my house that won't let me do anything? And they're like, what are you talking about? Not that kind of a deal. We don't want you to have weapons that you can use to stop us. That's what they're talking about. And who's responsible for that? I wonder. The United Nations had a big hand in it, didn't they? So 49 bases around your country. You're not negotiating with these people, are you? You're in pure intimidation. All of those military bases got biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons, and morons running the bases. Nuclear Safety Agency issues a warning against anti-5G necklaces that are actually radioactive. Now, I still haven't been able to work out what the hell is radioactive about it. They're very mum on that. So most likely, it's nuclear waste that they gave away and came back to haunt them. The Indians are claiming they got the best nuclear missiles on the planet. Congratulations, India. Just wow, eh? It turns out quite a few nukes are still missing from the Cold War. That's great. Where are they to? Well, I don't know. They're kind of everywhere. There's a lot of nuclear subs missing too, I think. I believe 50 nuclear weapons worldwide were lost. It's believed most of these weapons are currently lying in various locations on the seafloor. One of them is lying off the coastline of British Columbia. I thought they got that a couple of years ago. There's a couple more nukes. Some are in the Atlantic near New Jersey. Nukes are lying somewhere in the Mediterranean seas. And some nukes are lying in Warsaw Sound. And some are buried under some farmland in North Carolina. It's kind of like Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where September 11th, the plane went down into an old abandoned mine shaft. So he said, oh, well, can't do nothing about it. Then it's gone down, disappeared. So go down and get the seats and the luggage and the suitcases and the passengers. So the victims' families can have closure. And they said, you shut your mouth, you commie, you. One nuke is still buried under some farmland. Why don't you go get it back? Oh, that's okay. The farmer never lost a day's work. He's still shipping food out of the nuclear wasteland, I bet you. Yeah, it happens all the time, apparently. What they admit to, right? 1965, Philippines CA-4 crash took one weapon to Davy Jones' locker in the Pacific. U.S. lost a nuclear power submarine. Russia's got 160 beached, and they ran away from them up in northern Russia. 1968, a Soviet submarine took several nukes to the floor. We cover all of this. A B-52 crashed in Greenland, losing a nuke. Did you go looking for it? Well, what are you talking about? That's a great idea. Another Soviet submarine sank in 1970s, carrying some nukes. The Soviet lost some more nuclear weapons in the 80s. The Soviet lost another nuclear submarine in the 1980s. It's just another day in the nuclear industry for everybody. Russia war fears is putting nuclear bombers began target practice on Europe's doorstep. And then so Russia's strategic bombers are flying over Belarus's border. Sorry about that. Now, so Belarus, of course, is now ready to deploy the nuclear weapons. Deploy the nuclear weapons. Aye, aye, sir.
Bark, 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 bark.
A New World Disorder. Have you ever heard tell of the New World Order? That's what they're referring to. Oh, wait, I'll find George Bush Sr. for him. George knows. Nobody's pulling the wool over George's eyes. Hey, George, where are you too, buddy? Anytime you're... Here we go. This is what George Bush said about UN, a.k.a. New World Global
We have
Disorder.
before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
The UN, the first thing the UN done was it killed around 3 million in North Korea, because they're a military, right? Around 10 million wounded. Then they also napalmed every community, burnt every community to the ground. And since they've been formed, they've had land, sea, and air embargoes around many countries, certainly, and North Korea since they existed, since United Nations existed. The United Nations is the military-industrial complex. George Bush just told you they're the New World Disorder. Lancaster National Nuclear Laboratory shows off its capabilities to the energy minister. Now, tell me that they don't look like Frankenstein to you. I dare you. They look like a really bad 1960 movie, right? And you just, as soon as you look at this on the 1960 movie cover, you know this is going to be garbage. You know this is going to be what shit movie, but you're going to watch it anyway. You know that's going to be garbage. And guess what? They grew up and now they're in charge of the National Nuclear Laboratories. Oh, in the United Kingdom on top of that, Springfield, you know, from The Simpsons, right? The Simpsons was like Spider-Man and the Hulk. They were created by the nuclear industry to disarm the population. Now everybody's like, duh. A fourth company vehicle revolutionized nuclear decommissioning. They're in Sellafield, right? Right alongside of mixed oxide fuel meltdown at Windscale. They changed the name to Sellafield because when it melted down, they didn't go to universities or nuclear power plants or nuclear companies or the military looking for volunteers. Hardly. It's a nuclear meltdown, for goodness sakes, Dana. Nuclear scientists are not going near that. They went to the theaters in the 50s. Of course, the poorest people sat in the back of the audience. They went to the theaters and kidnapped the people out of the back of the theaters and sent them in with their paper suits on to push the fuel rods out of the graphite reactor. They wouldn't do it themselves and claimed there was no harm to the victims. If there's no harm to the people, why wouldn't they do it themselves? Why kidnap people from the back rows of theaters? These people should be waterboarded hundreds of times to find out what else they've been up to. Prosecute every one of them. North Korea, which was burnt to the ground by United Nations, denounces United Nations G7 statement urging abandonment of nuclear weapons. Yeah, like you first, America. That's their boogeyman. It's like why they go flatten Afghanistan, Americans and British, they flatten Iraq, they went to flatten Syria, flatten Africa and Boko Haram and everything else. All of these are staged events on top of that to get them in the war. And then keep you living in fear that Kim Jong-il is going to get you. Reassurance given by Dounreay, which they say is going to be 300 years before they can clean it up, was a reprocessing facility, a despicable reprocessing facility in the United Kingdom. After the latest survey looking for nuclear particles on sandy beaches, they claimed they never found no more particles. Well, obviously that's not true. Right? That's impossible not to find any particles. It's ongoing nuclear meltdown there. This is why they had to close it down. They're so evil, they defy any rationale. And then your media, which doesn't write the stories, they publish it for the industry and get a kickback, see? And then Google sticks them all up front and center, and Bing and the rest of them, and I'm stuck with it every day. And I wonder why I have nightmares every night. European power prices for Monday rise to record on cold snap because France got old, brittle reactors and they're starting to give out. They got over a quarter of them off and they just shut off another 4. 2, because they had incredibly dangerous flaws and their containment was actually rusted. It's not bad enough as bombarded with neutrons. It's in the Wigner effect is also corroded. While France halts more nuclear reactors. 70% of their fresh water goes to nuclear. They have to import most of their food in France because they don't have any fresh water. Everybody drinks it and gets a shower. There's not enough water left for a nuclear power plant, so you don't get any. You can do without. Doomsday dad, because the reactor don't get its 1,000,000 gallons a minute, it melts down. Doomsday dad, I'm a father of 4 and I live in a 6,000 square foot underground bunker. That ain't gonna protect you, man. You gotta breathe air and you can't filter the radiation out. To start, and get you away from the neutrons, burst and everything else, but you're still living in a hole in the ground because of the nuclear industry. And as we knew it was going to come to that some point, right? Exxon's nuclear industry, they should be charged with crimes against humanity. New York regulators approved Exxon's request to split its transmission and distribution business from its merchant nuclear power generation. Indian Point and the one out in New Jersey were killing around 20 billion big fish a year, 300 billion medium-sized fish a year, like young fish, and trillions of baby fish each year. And a lot of these were endangered species like sturgeons. All nuclear power plants have that same attribute, see? They're the definition of evil. If you're looking for the devil, look no further. It's nuclear. When will the sun explode? Keep you living in fear. Europe braces for energy crunch this week as deep freeze. And so Europe, this was designed to happen this way. And like you say, they brought in 633 nuclear power plants worth of renewables online in the last 24 months. They could fill the gap if they really wanted to. But the second that people realize that they can do it, nuclear day is by 2026, renewables will be producing more energy than all nuclear and fossil fuel generation combined worldwide. Another 4,800 gigawatts in just the next 4 years is expected to come online. We are in a revolution, and this thing is just taken off. Within the next 2 or 3 years, the nuclear industry won't be able to get anybody to invest in money. The government itself, right? Which they've captured, unfortunately. We need to go to war against the nuclear industry. You need to get busy. Nuclear war may break out again in India, against India. How's it doing down there in India? Well, we're taking about gone to a nuclear war. Russia's over there. We're flying nuclear bombers over people's borders, and they're getting nuclear weapons out. China's over, like, don't mess with us, man. We'll nuke you. The Americans, we don't have a first use policy. We'll just hit you. We got to. Right? And so the fear never stops, and there's no way to have a future when you're in an abusive relationship with your planet. New scale power to go public. This is a small modular reactor company that doesn't exist. There is no small modular reactors. And not only that, they're going to get up on, they're going to be out in the stock market, publicly traded. And there's lots of entities out there, and people will go to the lawyers' offices in their community, like, where could I invest money? Oh, I got the perfect deal for you. Small modular reactors. Yeah, it's the new wave. Give me your whole life savings. I'll take care of you. It's absurd. It's absurd. It's absurd. And we choked joy out that time. Hey, India's test firing more nuclear weapons. They're bragging now they got the most accurate weapons. Guess what? You don't actually have to be that accurate with a nuclear weapon. Next year, now, is this guy Putin a dictator? What? How's Russia going to get rid of this guy? He won't go away. He's like Benjamin Netanyahu. You're going to have to charge him with all kinds of crime to get him out of there. Heavy censorship tonight for some reason. We got a poll tonight. Should nuclear power plants emergency evacuation sirens extend out to 50 miles? Wait for it. I'll get there. Well, first off, I'd like to start off by saying nuclear emergency. If you can hear a nuclear siren, you shouldn't be growing food, dear. That's nuclear power plants surrounded by farms. That should terrify the living daylights out of you, because you go to the supermarket, you're going to be eating this stuff. Almost all nuclear power plants worldwide are surrounded by farms. But this is radioactive fallout from ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns in Japan. The radiation, this model only goes to the 31st, and the radiation will never stop falling from it. None of us will live to see the day when the skies will be clear of the radioactive fallout. Neither will our children live to see the day when the skies will be clear from radioactive fallout. And because you can't perceive it, or see it, or hear it, or touch it, then you're lulled into dreaming that it doesn't exist. Kim Jong-il's decade of rule. Decade of rule. What about Putin's decade of rule, or Benjamin Netanyahu's decade of rule? Clear and present dangers, the risks the country faces, and how we should prepare. We're gonna get nuclear weapons. Nuclear power may be banned in Ireland. So, advocating nuclear, clear and present danger, the risk the countries face, and how we should prepare. And complaining because Ireland, it's illegal to have nuclear weapons, or nuclear power rather, in Ireland. More ambitious energy policies needed. That's Taiwan, because Taiwan just voted no to more nuclear power, reopening one of their nuclear power plants that was shelved immediately when it was completed because Fukushima happened. And they're on a major fault line. They have major earthquakes there. They're a threat to our planet. The United States needs to strengthen its... and now, by the way, Taiwan had a problem with nuclear waste. And so they went to Orchard Island, which is part of their country. And Orchard Island is where they have the natives housed. And they asked the natives, could they use some of their land to build a salmon canning factory? And the natives were like, that's pretty cool, sure. Because they were figuring they might get some jobs out of it. And the government said there'd be kickbacks for using your land for everybody in the community. And there is like $1,000 a year kickback. And they built a nuclear repository there. Nuclear dump, actually. Not an actual repository, but an actual nuclear dump. And for decades, the natives thought they had a salmon cannon factory. And then it came out that it was actually a nuclear dump. That's Taiwan for you. There was 2,000 of Taiwan's nuclear students after Fukushima every day at school and university. The students, for part of the day, the students were required, 2,000 students, to go online and challenge anybody talking about Fukushima's ongoing nuclear meltdown. Their job was to convince the comments section on their YouTube and Twitter and Facebook that Fukushima was it was harmless and it was like a banana, a potato chip, like walking in sunshine or sleeping next to somebody or flying on a plane or climbing a mountain or peanut butter, any of the incredible insidious lies that they concocted and regurgitated for the last 75 years. I mean, that's a cult. That's the definition of a cult. And a very, very, very scary and heartless cult. And a very methodical cult trying to bury its crimes. It's like a criminal tries to bury their crimes. That's all we ever seen at a nuclear is this criminal activity. And they're not able to hide it per se as much, even though who knows what they've hid away. It's just that's their normal routine. Even though everybody knows the buildings don't even exist, they're actually on TV worldwide when no one challenging them, claiming they're in buildings that don't even exist. It's the most absurd, bizarre dimension this planet has ever got to. The United States needs to strengthen its unique relationship with the Marshall Islands. Unique relationships. Predator and prey. Just one of the bombs, and they set off, I can't remember the exact number, 60 or something. One of the bombs was equal to setting off 1,000 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons at the same time. This is not madness, this is insanity. And that one study, a recent study on top of that, shows over 1 million square kilometers of the Marshall Islands is too radioactive to live or eat the food there. 1 million square kilometers. Permanently irradiated. When starry nights are lonely. This was a book that I didn't end up going to figure out what it was, so I apologize for putting that in there. Senator Markey's statement on Build Back Better passed climate and clean energy provisions now. Climate. And so they're trying to put nuclear into the green zone now down there also. Government urges to guarantee power supply after, and France of course already done it, called nuclear green. Governments urged to guarantee power supply after referendum defeats, which is Taiwan. But what France, there was a conspiracy in 2015 where they had the 2015 Paris Accord meeting where all players of United Nations, the actual New World Order, the military-industrial complex, agreed to that nuclear was about to displace, or renewables were going to displace nuclear for sure, make it obsolete. So they concocted a plan to brainwash the population in increments over 6 and 7 years, and then for the countries, participating countries, to call nuclear green, why they made the switch to renewables. They knew Fukushima was causing an extinction event, and like BP, they wanted to blame it on you. If you don't know what I mean by that, BP Oil Company had a major oil spill. They had an advertisement campaign shortly after where they encouraged people to figure out their carbon footprint. And therefore, it was your fault, not BP's fault, that the coastline was full of oil and the animals were dying. They blamed it on you, the consumer. And it was such an effective propaganda tool that United Nations like, we want that. We want exclusive rights to carbon footprint, global warming, climate change, and net zero. That's the manuscript. There's another word. That's the tool they're using to bludgeon the entire planet with. So they got transmission lines looking up at the sun, start harvesting solar power. Taiwan's perfectly situated also for wind power. They have a lot of coastline. Welcome to the new Look, anything's better. It's better if everybody uses coal than have a single nuclear power plant on the planet. Coal plants don't spread plumes all around the world, by the way. Right? Coal plants don't make plumes like this. Oil plants don't make plumes like that. Gas plants do not make plumes like that kill all the species on our planets. Welcome to the new confusing Middle East with Russia, with Israel, and Saudis are now friends. Like, geez, I never thought I'd see that day. Lunatic Israeli. Editorial, Ukraine crisis calls for unity and resolve. Yeah, they're threatening now to blow up Ukraine. Understanding the Big Bang. First off, we use so much resources, so much brain power, so much monetary, right? So they like taking wealthy people's children, get them an education in something like this that is non-politicalized, right? Because that's what the parents wanted for murdering generations of people. And so there's a lot of military, a lot of NASA, a lot of government agencies, and their children would get a job working, looking into the solar system, so to speak, right? It's a dead end. It's a dead end thing because life is exterminating itself here, and if you don't preserve the life on the planet, that knowledge is pointless. And there are those who are going to argue, and there is good arguments that they produce, just in North America, 4.5 million academic studies each year. And elsewhere, and that's paid for by the taxpayers, by the way. And Elsevier, Springer, and Wiley, the three biggest publishers, has 22,000 journals on the planet between them. They get all of those studies for free, and then they put them behind a paywall, even though you paid for them. And the students, the universities, will buy studies of Elsfer, Springer, and Wiley for the semester, but only stuff that Elsfer, Wiley, and Springer is willing to let them use. Rent. It's not sold, it's rented for that season. And then if I want to peruse the academic studies or the students, they have to pay extra money. And you literally got to be... So just to some of these journals, just to look through the science section, say for instance, is $50,000. That's not buying a journal. That's just looking at what... Now, so the universities all over the world are repeating the same studies each year because they're not able to get access to the studies that are already completed. This is on purpose, right? Because there is people way up high who are strategically getting these studies done by the universities because they're trying to figure out something. And so it's all wasted. It's a complete waste. It ends up with the military-industrial complex benefit and groups like Monsanto. And so they destroy the habitat of the planet for all species. You don't just destroy Vietnam with Agent Orange, you're destroying the entire planet by doing that. And so all of these people that are studying outer space, you should put them to work at Fukushima to solve the riddles of all the nuclear dump sites and stuff like that. Because they're the inbreeds kids, see? Iran's water and soil crisis would destroy the country. So what's the odds that there's a weather war going on against Iran? There's a weather story coming. We done one yesterday, but there's another one coming up here later on. Because they can control the weather just with cloud seeding. They can do certain things. And they can break up clouds. So when rain clouds are coming into Iran, all you got to do is shear them and they dissolve. And they don't bring the rain to Iran. And if you don't get water coming in to replenish, and in a hot environment like Iran, you are in real trouble real quick. Sweden backs clean energy. Well, first off, Sweden's insane. The nuclear industry has captured most of Sweden. 56% of Sweden's energy comes from renewable energy now, mostly from hydropower, but in the mix are also wind, solar, and geothermal power. They're back and forth on their commitments constantly. Zirconian Market Research Report 2021 all the way up to 2027. And so that's cladding for nuclear fuel. That's really important, that kind of research. I pay attention to it a lot. There's a lot of posturing, though, is what you discover over the years. When will the sun explode? Why not, the only solution we got for real solution we got for nuclear waste is sending it towards something like the sun. That's the only solution that we can come up with. You can't leave it on Earth. In fact, there was a series of TV shows where they had a nuclear repository on the moon, and they were trying to get it all off the planet. Remember that? That was on TV for many years. Kenya detains Danish ship suspected Danish. They had huge dumps in the ocean, right, for years, those guys. Suspected of transporting radioactive material. I don't know what the story is about, though, where they were bringing it or what the story actually is. I'm hoping to find it eventually. Taiwan voters voted no on all the government's positions anyway, which is what they wanted, was a no vote. They don't want that nuclear power plant in Taiwan open, and I'm so glad they didn't get it, but they'll try again soon. Until you demolish it, they'll continue to try. Looking back, because the nuclear industry, one thing about them is they're very persistent. There's a lot of bootlickers in the nuclear industry. Well, they're all bootlickers. They're a bizarre cult. Looking back this week in Eastern Idaho history. I forgot to follow up on that story. My apologies. Some of these, I didn't clear them out because I was trying to do graphics earlier. And then couldn't keep that up. Young kin will lower cost of living, strengthen state energy production. I haven't found the rest of that per se. Well, nuclear is completely CO2 free. So when you hear him say those words, that's not good. Because that's impossible, by the way. Saying nuclear is completely CO2 free is absurd. I'll give you a quick example. If there's such a thing in this world as a quick example. There really isn't any quick examples, is it? Well, every nuclear power plant needs at least 2 cold oil or gas plants to run. So it can't be carbon free for starters when it's running, because it needs 2 dedicated 2 coal plants, gas plants, oil plants. Typically coal because it's cheaper, but at least 2 of these to run a nuclear power plant dedicated to only the nuclear power plant site itself. Because it needs an absurd amount of energy, it can't run on its own. But a nuclear power plant boils 1 million gallons a minute, and there's 1 billion creatures per glass of water. So 1 billion creatures, and per glass of water is typically 75 to 100 million phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain that goes up the stack of the nuclear power plant also. So 16 million times 1 billion creatures times 440 every minute, 1,440 minutes a day for 40 or 50 years, eggs and larvae, all that boiled off and evaporated into the environment. All of it is carbon, right? But carbon is not what's killing the planet, it's radioactive fallout. So the radioactive fallout, this is Japan's radioactive fallout. This model is only based upon, I think this one is France's, yeah. It's based on 16 days. Yeah, it stops at the 26th of March. The accident was on the 11th of March, 15 days. And that in 15 days, it covers the whole planet, yeah? So then you have the race horses, where you see, I see it come across a lot of the race horses with the word nuclear. It does show you, though, how much nuclear is entrenched into society when you constantly come and seeing it. Settlers attack Palestinian homes as Israel shouts death to Arabs. And so Israel got a lot of nuclear dumping. Apparently, they're being accused now of dumping their nuclear waste in Palestine. Israel created 5 million refugees in Palestine, mostly adults. And they got no problem keeping them out, but they can't get rid of the 10,000 Hamas that a lot of evidence suggests they created. And is used to demonize and vilify the Palestinians to the public worldwide. It's just absurd. The whole story is absurd. Israeli settlers took to the streets in Jerusalem shouting slogans about killing Palestinians and burning their villages. And Jerusalem was Palestine on top of that. Palestine does not steal Israeli land. Israel steals the Palestinian lands. Palestine hasn't got Israeli refugees. Israel created 5 million refugees in Palestine's country. So, like, it's a very, very dangerous cult, this Israeli routine. Sabers without warning. And so I guess they got, with that nuclear blast label, come across a lot of that too. China signs deal to build 1,000 schools in Iraq. There's actually 5 million orphans in Iraq. You know, to get 10,000 Taliban. Millions dead, millions missing, millions in refugee camps, millions unaccounted for. Millions of orphans to get 10,000 Talibans. 100,000... I can't remember the exact number. So like 100,000 suicides in the military in 10 years? Or, I'm sorry, it was 100,000 rapes in a decade, over 100,000. It was 29 rapes a day, which worked out to that they recorded in the U.S. military. But hang on here. 29 men and women, right? Times 365. Yeah, it's over 100,000. Rapes in the military to get 10,000 Taliban. 70,000 suicides in the military to get 10,000 Taliban. And they've done the same thing for Afghanistan, the same thing from Syria to get 10,000 Taliban. And the same thing too, of course, Boko Haram was a branch split off from the Taliban. So they got millions dead, millions missing, millions in refugee camps, millions unaccounted for because of 10,000 Boko Haram, 10,000 Hamas in Palestine, 10,000 Mujahideen. Russia was there for 10 years for that one. It's the magic number, right? And then call them terrorists and use it, justify that then to be the terrorists. An estimated 3.5 million Iraqi children lack access to school because George Bush liberated them, freed them. They knocked down every building in Iraq. You know who won the war in Iraq and Afghanistan? It was Monsanto. They weren't allowed to grow their own seeds for 20 years and only allowed to grow Monsanto seeds. South Korea needs to focus on details because South Korea is still theoretically at war with North Korea because United Nations told them to. At the United Nations. So the United Nations kills 3 million people there, 10 million wounded, and because they went to war. When the United Nations was created, the first thing they've done was went over and napalmed every community in North Korea. Then they put land, sea, and air embargoes to hide what they'd done, turn them into a boogeyman so the world wouldn't know the truth. Last September, President Moon Jae-in repeated his proposal to declare an end to the Korean War at the United Nations General Assembly. In other words, the United Nations General Assembly has been at war for this whole time against North Korea. And your revolting captured medias use North Korea as a boogeyman. Almost every day, every one of them do. They'll have a story somewhere on their site. Asian American scientists accuse Sandia. Of course, they got one of the world, America's biggest aquifers underneath that nuclear waste site. Well, it was one of the biggest aquifers. That was just a nuclear waste. Ready to set up advanced biological defense labs. Defense lab. That's India, I think it was. Don't quote me. Can't remember, maybe. Yeah, for India. So a biological lab is not self-defense. It's a weapon that threatens all species on the planet. Oh my God. Congressional hopeful vows to ensure white people remain a majority if he's elected. The media loves putting out stuff like that. Like, white people are only 2% of the population on the planet. And the majority are good people. The one that gets in positions of authority are the monsters. And therefore, if you're white, you're a monster. Man beaten to death inside of India's chic golden temple. So this is madness, where you have a religious temple and somebody comes in and insults you there, then your solution is to beat him to death? And you guys got nuclear weapons? Commit a sacrilegious act inside the historic golden temple. So a bunch of people just rushed him and killed him right on the spot. I think it was like the Eyes of March, what they'd done, where a whole bunch of them just ran up and stabbed him at the one time and then ran away. The most unfortunate, heinous act to attempt sacrilege. So the government come out and attacked the guy that was murdered. And they're in charge of nuclear weapons, apparently. The high cost of chasing made-up targets. Does anyone in the government ever admit they were wrong? Not counting any apologies they issued for actions of people who were in the government decades or centuries ago. It's usually a century later they'll apologize, right? Can you think of even one time that a government official walked back something they had done personally? No. U.S. can approve weapons but cannot ensure basic needs. Well, to ensure basic needs, which is the money was meant for, then they can't destroy the planet. Your biggest enemy is your militaries. There is no military. Now it's some weird death cult like nuclear. Eisenhower had ended his presidential term by warning the nations about the increasing power of the scumbag military-industrial complex. It's a military-industrial goblin fest is what it really is. So the winter solstice was yesterday. December 21st, that's today. So today is the longest darkness, the longest dark day of the year. Each day now it gets a little later. I'm already planning out the research expeditions for the spring. I'm building the operation to try to get it accomplished this year. We just lost 10 years of research. Google pulled my site with no strikes and no warning and no explanation. Taiwan cast most no votes of all referendums. The scum nuclear industry hid themselves this year. I never really got much on the nuclear industry. You can be sure that we covered them during the last referendum. One of the things on the referendum was, should they have a referendum with every vote? Yeah, of course you should. They don't want to have it. That's why they're having it, the referendum. Because the referendum really, people vote for nuclear food? No. People vote for nuclear power? No. All of a sudden, nuclear is on its heels against the rope. New astrophysical study probes X-ray bursts from low-mass X-ray binaries. Let's see if they can figure out what to do with the nuclear waste, because that stuff ain't going to matter if you can't solve what's happening to the planet. There is no future. You'll never get to that stage if you don't solve. If you don't take care of your planet, you got no fantasies. Technical education is important in the national defense system. Technical education, they're calling for more. India is at the forefront of the missile launch in the world, so they're calling for more scientists in India, right, to work for national defense systems, basically, which is a mistake. You don't need a if everybody got rid of the military, then you couldn't have a war. Sanctions of mass destruction. Sanctions, which is what they got done to Iran and North Korea and many impoverished countries, Niger. France has been doing that to Niger. So in Afghanistan right now, they went down and liberated them, left them to starve to death, all of them. Killer robots aren't science fiction, and the push to ban them is growing. Well, that's if you don't rein them in, that's where you're going to end up, right? If you don't speak out, they're just going to go ahead and do the stupidest things because there's no incentive not to. And so voices like me are silent because there's no other dissent, no pushback. And the ones that appear to be pushing back are the opposition, controlled opposition. They create the opposition and then they can control it, right? So people then are directed to the controlled opposition like James Colbert. James Colbert comes across like a really nice guy, and he's 100% not. He's 100% scumbag. There's a lot of them. We've called them out over the years, not because we're trying to be mean, but because we're trying to warn you. We have the evidence and we provide the documentation. My assertions when I come out like that is I provide the documentation, and I usually provide my phone number so people can come in and attack me. Come in and bash me. I don't give a shit. Let's have a conversation. But don't be sly and sneaky about it. Don't be like that. I provide my number so you don't have to. Killer robots aren't science fiction. No. Oh, no. So killer robots, think of 1,000,000 drones flying over your country. And then some country saying, now you're going to surrender, we're going to launch. Like, okay, well, I guess we're going to surrender, otherwise you're going to blow up everything. That's coming. They're already making plans for the factories. Insert foot, the worst nightmare this side of Costco. Yeah, it's called nuclear. Power supply, China donates solar lights to rural communities. Because like each year, the capabilities are doubling or even better. So they had 200 sets of off-grid photovoltaic equipment. They donated, but this is obsolete equipment. Normally they throw it in the garbage because they're miserable, but they made themselves look good and got up in the media. France commits to India Made in India defense manufacturing program. You don't need all these weapons. We have phones now, see? You call each other and work it out. You don't need to keep destroying the planet so you can make a paycheck, you pieces of shit. After the collapse of the Australian submarine deal, France has now gone shopping for other useful idiots, and he's signed the deal to sell 80 upgraded fighter jets to United Arabs. Of course, and if you look at the atrocious human rights cases down in Saudi Arabia, where they bring people in for manual labor to build all those big skyscrapers and cities, and they take away their passports and they work at slave labor 16 hours a day and live in slums. Here we got a rich nuclear scientist wants to give away all of his money. So he wants some pro-nuclear, useful idiot, and then he'll give away his money. Can you be evil? Yeah, okay, you'll do. Violence erupts in Belgium as police clash with hooded protesters. Hooded protesters. A small group of protesters clashed with police, so the police now was able to bring in all the weapons and water cannons and everything else. It's called a staged event. It's called agile. It's called a provocateur. And one of my handles used to be agile provocateur. So I would go out and challenge their narratives by hiding away, but I gave that up a long time ago. After anti-lockdown protesters clashed with police, but it was just a small group of hooded. They all had the hoods on. They all had the same boots on too, Dana, because the military likes you to be uniform. They go out and pretend they're attacking the police. Now the police has legal right to come bash the moral and ethical protesters in their head until they can't see. Nuclear power plant equipment market witness stunning growth by 2028. This is all posturing when you see stuff like that. That's simply not true. They brought on 633 nuclear power plants worth of renewable energies last year online, rather in 24 months. Staggering amount of energy. And it's just going to get better because the prices come down. Nuclear keeps going up. Every year, nuclear price goes up. Rolls-Royce obtained financing for a small nuclear power plant. Very small, very small. How small? Well, it was pretty small, Dana. For a small nuclear power plant. So 85 million brings them up to 500 million sterlings or pounds or something. Once again, they can't do anything. They got to spend at least that much money to do the studies, right? And find the site and then make the site usable. There's a whole lot of criteria. The nuclear meltdown has to go down and hit the old bedrock, and there has to be a river that pushes it into a volume of water. That's their oh shit plan. And these reactors they're talking about are all mixed oxide fuel. An abomination. It's an absolute abomination to use mixed oxide fuel, which is illegal in the United States, is illegal in Canada, in most countries. But France at La Hague and United Kingdom at Dounreay and Windscale, which was renamed to Sellafield after the nuclear meltdown, is still going on. 8 million litres a day going into the Atlantic Ocean. Can now begin scouting locations for factories to supply parts for the constructions of the small reactors. Scouting locations for factories. Yeah, that's 90% of the money goes to administration. That's what the first rule of the thumb is. So 10% goes towards actual physical stuff. Reactors. It's nonsense. Renewables, like it or love it, and the renewables is in your face at this stage. There's a revolution right now, and it's real. It's not a game. Nuclear can't compete with renewables. Can you build 633 nuclear power plants in 24 months? No. And renewables can double that each year for infinity. It doesn't need to. By 2026, renewables will have displaced all nuclear, all 450 nuclear operators on the planet, and displace all fossil fuel plants on the planet. It'll exceed that. So the year after is going to be dramatic, and the year after that will be dramatic again. And so within 10 years, it's impossible for nuclear to... they're going to just have to stop the nuclear in the near future because there's going to be no need for it. And the military-industrial complex, you're idiots. You're not heroes. You're zeros. Ukraine's foreign minister says West is discussing the nuclear option of cutting Russia off from SWIFT. So there's a lot of posturing. When the USSR put out a gas well with a nuclear weapon, it was a big nuclear weapon, as if the well had been a gigantic candle. The nuclear weapon blew it out. 47 kilotons was what they wanted. They used for another one. There was another one they done a month later, rather. And this one was equal to 2 Hiroshima bombs, the first one. And the next one was equal to 3 Hiroshima bombs to put out a gas well. They're lunatics, eh? You could have used conventional explosives and done the same thing. U.S. Navy reveals successful test of laser weapons. Now, the flying laser had a problem. They needed a lot of energy to make it work. And they couldn't put a nuclear reactor on the plane because it was, first, illegal. Second, you couldn't get on the plane with the reactor there because you couldn't carry enough shielding. And third was, why do that when we can use mixed oxide fuel to power the generator? And so they were using radiation isotopes, high energy isotopes is how they said it. It was a father and son who pioneered that whole project, right? And the airplanes were originally using these interchangeable pods of fuel rods. Basically, almost like a little nuclear reactor, but more like the stuff you send into space where it produces high wattage. And then so they only get bigger, more powerful, need more energy. The only thing they can't carry around the big generators with them. Why would they when they can make these little nuclear fuel rods that already exist? USS Navy successfully test-fired a laser weapon and destroyed a floating target in the Gulf. How long before they use it against the civilian population? What else can they do with something like that? Can they cause different frequencies? The new weapon could be used to target drone boats. Yeah, they got a million excuses. Which one do you want to hear? Germany expels 2 Russian diplomats in 2019 murder. So what happened was some guy got stabbed in a park in Georgia, an ethnic Chechen of Georgian nationality, in Germany, in a park, in a central Berlin park. And Buddy was caught and sentenced to life in prison. Turns out he was ordered by the Russian government to kill the guy. Weather Center, all of these are today and yesterday's stories, by the way. Weather Center hosts cloud seeding exhibition in the United Kingdom and Saudi Arabia, yeah. So they're hosting a cloud seeding, chemtrailing exhibition. Well, that's just fantastic. Or that's amazing. Or holy shit, they actually do that? Dana, they don't do chemtrailing, Dana. I know, I hear you, but you might want to go tell them guys, though, not me. The event accompanied a workshop titled Flight Operations at the Regional Program for Artificial Rain. Artificial rain. Artificial storms. In fact, during the Vietnam War, they were able to make the typhoon, the rainy season, last an extra 6 weeks. And they were so good at producing rain by cloud seeding in the Vietnam War, they were washing villages off mountains. Entire villages disappeared. The British apparently were really good at it. They were at it since the 40s. The regional program for artificial rain is considered one of the most important initiatives in the Middle East Green Initiative. Yeah, we can make it rain in the desert, and the Saudis can have another little kingdom out there somewhere. Japan executes 3 death row prisoners in the first hanging for 2 years. Well, like Shinzo Abe, they should just hang him. They don't have to wait 2 years. And everybody in the nuclear industry in Japan and everywhere else, and Japan's legal, should be hung for the genocide, ecocide, and omnicide they're doing to their own country. It's unbelievably, incredibly insidious. One guy was hung for a 2004 hammer and knife rampage that ended with 7 dead, including his elderly aunt and 2 cousins. So they banned hammers and knives in Japan forever. So carried out the penalty by hanging, which using a purpose-built chamber in Tokyo with a trap door below the prisoner and a rope attached to the ceiling. And he should hang all the nuclear industry down there for what they done to the country. But put a camera in there so I can watch it on YouTube. If you don't mind, I'd appreciate it. Japan, like whoever done this here in Japan, raised the safety limits for passing out iodate pills to 75 times higher than the World Health Organization recommended for children. You should definitely hang that piece of shit. Excuse the Newfoundlandese here. All right. So how did we do tonight anyway? The poll got 44 votes, an astounding 98% of people said nuclear power plants, emergency evacuation sirens, should extend out to 50 miles. Yeah, and you shouldn't be able to live within 50 miles of a nuclear power plant. Should be the next poll, right? Should people live within 50 miles of a nuclear power plant? Let's have a referendum on that. That's what I'm talking about. Let's have a referendum on that shit. Woo! Yeah, that's so much work. I gotta wipe the table and get ready to do the next one. As tomorrow night is coming at me fast. I'm already on a countdown for my next shows. Just work yourself to the death, Dana, why don't you? If you knew what I knew, you'd do the same thing. If you knew nuclear like I know nuclear, you'd be like me, panicked the whole time. Desperate to wake up the planet, they go cut their throat. Legally, of course. Bash their head in. Legally, of course. Throw them in a wood chipper. Legally, of course. You'd be just like me. Yeah, let's throw them in a wood chipper, Dana. These are scum. Look, coal, oil, and gas doesn't do that to your planet. That's radioactive fallout from just a nuclear meltdown. Nuclear power is the enemy of all species. And you better get it together because this planet is in real trouble. It's not a game. You are in real trouble. You are in very real danger. And you can't change a lot of it. But you can get rid of nuclear as a sign of good fate. And try to have a future for whatever species can survive. Ooh. James Lucid, Dana Nasana, Daryl Murray, Mike Mansfield, I only served one king, James Oldhand, Nancy, hi everybody, Ella, P. Swear, Cough Mixture, John Coleman, Provoke, Blue Jay, Colette S, hi everybody. Woo, that was a hard run there tonight. We got through it. Code 8. Everybody. Trip. Sonic. Good night, everyone. Leonard. SCH. Nerad. Yolof. Patrick. John Curtis. Carbon footprint, yeah. I hear you. Marge. Robert. Good night, everybody. Sandra Churchill. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. I'm not sure how many more shows we're going to do this week. I'm not really fond of taking any time off. Nuclear industry can do real scary shit in a short period of time. You got to keep an eye on it so I don't have the ability of getting any time off. I just want to do something good for you and the planet and the 8 million species. I'm going to have a legacy is that I try to curb stomp nuclear every step of the way. And I wasn't very polite about it. That'll be my legacy. How about yours? Scott, Daniel, God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. Bob, yeah, we'll see everybody tomorrow night. Thank you, folks. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you're watching this later. And We'll see everybody tomorrow night. We've got a great show planned for tomorrow night. By the way, there was 33 whales died in New Zealand. And there's mortality events for right whales, grey whales, blue whales, humpback whales, fin whales, beaked whales, not just, and they're all massive beachings too, right? It's end times for our species because of nuclear. Take care, folks. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Same time. Have a great one.